Very warm welcome to this three-part series. So over the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be leading us in a whole series of talks on this idea of the tantric description of the holy person as a ghost, a madman, and a child. Yeah, so that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at these three epithets according to the tantric siddhas of the holy person, which is ghost, madman, and child. It's quite striking. I remember the first time reading it thinking, because there's so much sort of evoked with all three of those terms, isn't it? And not particularly obvious as to what it is about the spiritual qualities that they're sort of getting at. What is it about a ghost that's pointing at something of the spiritually mature? What is it about a madman that's pointing at something of the spiritually mature, of a child? Yeah. So we're going to look at that over the next 3 weeks, and we're going to be doing things slightly differently here on Dharma Night. We're going to get sort of you all engaging a bit more, and we're going to sort of do it a bit differently. So we'll give that a shot. So what we're going to do initially, first off, we're just going to see, well, what do we think might actually be what the tantric siddhas are getting at when they thought of the holy person as like a ghost. You know, what might they have been getting at? So why don't we just for a few minutes, probably about 3 minutes, get into groups of threes and just throw it around. Yeah, just toss it around. It'll be a total racket down here. It'll be great. Don't worry. It'll be like a party. Yeah, and just what might they be getting at? What is it about a ghost that's spiritually sort of, that is evocative of the spiritually wise? So why don't you do that now? Introduce yourselves, groups of three, and I'll ring a bell. Well, so in a way, there's no particular right answer with this, so your guess is as good as mine. So what do we think? What do people think? Yeah.
Do the ghosts have anything to do with the hungry ghosts? On the Wheel of Life.
Yeah, let's not go down that line. There's multiple metaphors, isn't there? It's an interesting one. Yeah, there's a few. All of these images have lots of different angles, don't they? But yeah, let's not get down that one. Yeah.
I was thinking of like the ghost sort of allowing experiences to kind of pass through it in a translucent way, so like neither pushing things away or like clinging on to things, just experiencing them but letting it pass through and just letting it be.
So they're much sort of more airy, aren't they? Kind of less gross, not sort of solid and kind of clunky in that way. So that's definitely an aspect of the ghost, isn't it? And a shared aspect of the holy person. Yeah.
I mean, a ghost is spiritual to the extent that it doesn't have materiality, it doesn't have like corporeal materiality.
Yes, yeah. So is spirit. Yeah, so it's a very similar point, isn't it? It's sort of less kind of weighted in a certain sort of sense, more free in a particular way. Yeah. Maybe one more.
I think ghosts exist in the physical world, but also in sort of a mystical realm. In between.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're sort of a little bit closer to the divine, maybe in a certain sort of sense. Although in Buddhism they are described as mundane in the sense of being unenlightened, sort of conditioned, if you get me. But maybe they sort of inhabit a little kind of in-between place in a certain way. Yeah. So, I mean, when I was thinking of this, one of the things that immediately came to mind was the early Buddhist followers who the forest renunciates, and in fact even the sort of whole forest renunciant scene at the time, which would have been very, very broad in India and would have included sort of Hindu ascetics, it would have included Buddhists as well, the Buddhist followers. And they would live in the forest, and they were said to sleep at the base of trees and beg for their food in the local villages. And the villagers just thought these people absolutely remarkable. They thought them absolutely incredible. They'd say they'd sort of come, they'd appear somewhere, and then they'd give a teaching in exchange for food, and then they'd disappear into the forest again. They were described almost as like spectres, like ghosts. And it's quite remarkable to think of this, actually. I mean, I think Buddhist history is so filled with so much myth, which is very, very fantastical. Like the Padmasambhava slays the demons, or he doesn't slay them, he transforms the demons. Christian, sorry. He transforms the demons. And so much of even the Buddha's life story, he says he's supposed to be raised into the air and emits water and fire at the same time. And of course that's to be understood mythically, isn't it? It didn't literally happen, but it's to be understood mythically. Not by that false, but sort of poetically true. But it really is remarkable to think that there were a group of men and women who did live in the forest that way. Like they did sleep at the foot of trees, they begged their food, they had to deal with all the danger of snakes and tigers and disease and illness and injury and all of those things. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I was telling people before, I had mice up in my room for a while and I was petrified. I used to knock on the door before I went in so that the mice could scarper off, Imagine a tiger being in there. But they did this, and the local villagers described them as sort of like ghosts. Bante's teacher, Sangharakshita, who founded Triratna, he said one of his teachers was said to be like this. I think it was Chatrul Rinpoche. He'd just turn up, and then he could be there for a while, and then he'd just disappear, and he'd turn up 500 miles down somewhere else, having nobody seen him for a time. He was like a ghost. So I think partly what that's getting at is these early followers were of no fixed abode. They were of no fixed abode. They were completely free. And I think a lot of what that's getting at is they had completely, basically thrown off home. They'd completely thrown off home. Now, when we think of home, like when we think of home as, say, children, what do we think of? We think of sort of comfort. We think of security. We hopefully think of love, of warmth, although it's not necessarily like that for everybody. Stability, all of those sorts of things. There's a sort of whole metaphor of home, isn't there? When we think of home, we sort of evoke a whole feeling and an image. But what these early Buddhist followers were doing, who lived in the jungle, is they were completely sort of throwing this off. They were completely kind of going forth from it. Rejecting it in a certain sense, that whole sense of sort of security and refuge in that particular way. So they were kind of really just throwing themselves in against the elements in a certain way, and the animals and all of those things. And security is often what we're chasing, isn't it? Security is very much, it's very, very important to us as human beings. We're always chasing it. Like, say, for example, in Ireland, people are always thinking about the thing that you need to do is buy your home. Then you've got security. You've got security when you have your home. There's this whole sort of life project often of owning a home. And that's said to sort of give you security into old age. I know people who just spend their whole lives chasing security. And of course, the interesting thing about it is that very rarely do we feel secure, irrespective of how much money. In fact, I would say the more secure that we are objectively, the more insecure we often feel subjectively. That's been my experience of it. And it's been experience of my friends as well, who have spent years and years, oftentimes in very, very high paid jobs, lots of savings, properties, everything like that. They never feel secure. And I think you can see that sort of in the general zeitgeist as well. It's interesting that as we've got more secure as a society, as a civilization even, and we are incredibly secure now as things go sort of globally and historically. You know, you really, living in the West, the vast majority of us are almost guaranteed, you know, of course subject to sickness and everything like that, but you will be very much more secure than sort of anybody else generally around the world, or historically as well. But it's interesting that we've got more and more anxious with that security, haven't we? We've got more and more prone to worry, anxiety, fear, all of those sorts of things. And it's interesting that even small risks now have started to become they're felt much more significantly. COVID, you really saw this, didn't you? People got desperately afraid. Even though, and a bit controversial to say, but COVID, from a global perspective and a historical perspective, really wouldn't have been very risky for somebody. They wouldn't have seen it as very risky, say, 100 years ago or 500 years ago, or whatever it might have been. You know, if you ever read old sort of stories of the plague, the family would just die. Somebody would catch it and the whole family would just die overnight. Like all of London used to reduce its population by a half over various summers where the plague was bad. Like, it was just remarkable. But with COVID, we felt very fearful and insecure, didn't we, and anxious. And you get that more and more now, that as we get more secure, the more anxious that we feel. It's interesting, you've had this movement in parenting recently that has, I don't know what it's called, maybe somebody will know, but that encourages, basically gets parents to take risks with their kids. Like, it's interesting, kids used to just be chucked out the door, weren't they? They were like, okay, off you go, I don't want you under my feet. Come back, hopefully not with your arm broken at nightfall or something like that, or as close as you possibly can. It's interesting now, kids just don't go out the door, do they? Everything is sort of seen as too sort of risky for children. And it apparently now there's a whole sort of movement that's going against that sees that actually as quite crippling for a child's development. Like, a child needs to be starting to engage with risk very early on if they're going to sort of develop properly. And that engagement with risk, you know, with like children, it's like climbing trees, it's skateboarding without helmets, it's you know, it's doing all that sort of stuff. Basically, that's very important, that you start engaging with risk and start dialoguing with risk early on. But as we've got more and more secure and more anxious with that security, even the relatively tiny amounts of risk that we have to deal with become sort of unbearable. You know? So I think what the early Buddhist followers, in being of no fixed abode and being ghostly in this way, were basically just fully engaging with the existential reality of life, that life is insecure. You know? That's what the Buddha would say. There is no security in samsara. So this existence that we have, that we all share to a certain extent, unenlightened reality, so the reality, objective reality that as you and I know it, offers no security whatsoever. You can save and save and save, and it can all be taken from you like that. Yeah, you can get sick, you can die, you can still, even with all our security that we have, seeming security that we have, it can still all be taken from us. And of course, we know for sure will be taken from us one day. Yeah, irrespective of how much we save up and sort of have the career and the marriage and the kids and all of that, we know that it's precarious. Yeah? That's what the Buddha would say, that life is precarious. And more than that, it's inevitably going to be taken from you. It's not that it's risky. It's a risk that it'll be taken from you sooner rather than later, but inevitably it will. Yeah? So the Buddha would say that life is completely insecure in that way. And very often, actually, I think the sort of seeming security of our existence blinds us to that fact. We're blinded to death. Death is sort of moved over into a corner, a very quiet corner, where it's sort of this sort of slightly disagreeable kind of thing that we sort of don't want to look at. Yeah. So the Buddha would say we don't truly own anything. Yeah, we certainly don't own those things that we use to try and sort of build refuge from the insecurity of life. You know, things like cars, like homes, like careers, all that sort of thing. We basically don't own them. They're not ours. And often, interestingly enough, lead us to start getting worried about them. My friend Dharma Night, he's an order member, he talks about saving and saving and saving for this beautiful Audi TT, fantasized about it, saved up for years and years and years and years, and eventually got it, and just worried about it the whole time. He used to wake up in the middle of the night because he thought it was going to be nicked. He was in the driveway, just thought it was going to be nicked all the time. So at 3 a.m, he'd get up to make sure it was still out there. There's sort of these phantom alarms going in his head of the Audi TT that it was going to be stolen, all of those sorts of things. Yeah. He used to have workmen in, and then he'd be convinced that the workmen were going to get the keys and run off with the Audi TT. So it's very often the things that we sort of do to sort of shore up our sense of security against the world, we then start to feel anxious and insecure about those things. So the early Buddhist followers just basically completely threw that off. They totally faced into the insecurity of our existential situation, and didn't start to gather more things to be worried and insecure about. They just completely threw that off. And so they were like ghosts, And I think this idea of this ghost is of no fixed abode. Completely sort of gone forth from any sense of trying to build a refuge from the realities of life, a false refuge from the realities of life that you can't get in conditioned existence. So what the Buddha is saying is that the more that we can move to that, the more, in a sense, we become radically freed. Yeah, the more, in a sense, that actually, interestingly enough, we throw off anxiety and throw off fear. Yeah, and well, there's a little practice, and I'm gonna give it a shot now. We're gonna I'm not so sure about the wisdom of this, but we're gonna give it a shot. There's a little practice that we do in the Triratna Buddhist order that sort of helps to kind of evoke or start to get at this idea of our existential situation as being completely insecure, as being completely insecure. And that's the 6-element practice. And the 6-element practice, well, I'm going to talk us through it a little bit so we can give it a go. But I'm going to particularly look at a stage from it, which is the stage on space. 6-element practice that looks at the various ways that we start to sort of cling to the elements, like the body, for example, in terms of earth, and cling to them in the sense that they gives us some sort of security or guarantee against the vicissitudes of life, as if we own it in some sort of way, and it will be ours. But of course we know, well, in the case of the body of earth element, it will betray us, won't it? It'll go back to the earth. It will leave us one day. And in fact, we don't own it. It's all the time we're taking earth element in. It's all the time leaving us as well. One day it will leave us completely. That's not the end in Buddhism. Consciousness continues, but the body will leave. It's said to continue, but the body will leave us continue. Similarly, space, that's what we also do with space. This is another element of the 6-element practice, is space. We take spaces and we make them ours, and we think that we call that space ours, and then we think that that space gives us security. But of course space, the element space, is in the element that we all sit in here with now, doesn't belong to us either. It doesn't belong to us either. It doesn't belong to us when we have a mortgage over it, and it doesn't belong to us when we sit just amongst it briefly in a shrine room either. Eventually we leave the space, and the space goes back to the world, and eventually when we die, one day the space goes back, the space element goes back to the rest of space element as well. I sometimes like to think of this, the room that you grew up in as a kid, the house is probably still there, isn't it? It's probably a home office now. Somebody's like chirping away at it, or some other little teenager has it with like other posters on the wall. I like to reflect on this. It's like this idea of this thing that was so sort of caught up with me, so mine in a certain way, is not mine. There's somebody else in there now who never knew me and who couldn't give a barnacles that I had Che Guevara up above my bed, you know, whatever it might be. Yeah? So there's nothing mine about it. So let's give that a shot. Yeah? Okay, so set up for meditation. Okay, so again, just coming back to the body and the breath. And if ever this meditation gets a bit too intense, you can just come to metta or come back to the breath. So the effect should be liberating. And that's what we're looking for. So firstly, we're just coming to awareness of everything solid in our experience. So anything earth-like, so especially the body. The touch of our hands, and the feeling of our teeth, anything solid. And we can just reflect lightly while staying aware of the solidity in our experience, that this earth element is all the time changing. And it's changed obviously since we were a child to now. continue to change as we get older, renewing and falling away. And this earth element that is our body will leave us. We'll go back to earth element outside of our body. And we will die. And we can just reflect of this, that this body is not me, not mine. And can we let go of seeking security through it? And can't give us that. Not me, not mine. The effect here we're looking for is one of freedom. So then we can bring to mind space element. So here we're just aware of the space that we occupy. So it's the shape that we make within space. again, we can reflect that this isn't ours. We occupy it now, but soon it'll be occupied by somebody else. And this is true of all space we call ours. So we can reflect that our work desk, our home, even our bedroom will one day be occupied by somebody else. We can't get security from it. And this is true of all space that we have called our own through our entire lives. And we can just reflect, not me, not mine. Space element is not me, not mine. One day, even the space that our body occupies will return to the space element. Let's see, can we let go? Give back, space element. It's useless to grasp it. We just give it back. And we can just drop the reflection now. And just sending ourselves metta, sending ourselves well-wishing. Dropping in, may I be well. And then sending that well-wishing to all living beings. And then just dropping any meditation now, any effort we're making, just sitting. Okay, good. So what we'll do is we'll go upstairs for the tea break now, and we'll. All right, great. So I'm intrigued. How do people find it? How do people get on? What do people notice?
I find myself looking forward to the night bath now halfway
through
Yeah.
first.
Say a little bit more about that, interestingly. Well,
It just felt quite difficult.
Right.
Sort of just macabre and
right.
abstract.
Right, I see. Yeah. Emotionally difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is the danger of some of these as well, isn't it? That actually, well, partly because the way Buddhism sees death is so different from the way that we often see death. Like for Buddhism, death is a release and a liberation and potential, and a continuance on of something, a furtherance of the journey. And of course, that's not how we see it usually, isn't it? So we can bring that particular view of death to the practice, and then you're right, it does become quite a hard practice after that as well. Yeah. So I think actually what you have to do is, if you are noticing that's happening, is just go back to metta, or just lace lots of metta through the whole thing, if you get me. Like you can reflect, yes, my body earth element will leave me, may I be well, in that same sort of way, and then actually similarly with other people as well, because of course that will happen with others too. Yeah. What about others?
I found it quite comforting, in the sense focusing on, like, let's say the air or the breath, because like you say, everything is insecure, like there's no security in life, but as long as I have my breath, I find comfort in that. So I feel when I look at it in that way, then it can be quite helpful to go through challenging times.
Yeah. Well, I think possibly as well what it does is it moves us more into a sense of gratitude for what we have, including our bodies, including all the problems that we might find with it as well, because ultimately they are borrowed. And so that in a way means we should be very grateful for them. Like Tibetan Buddhism in particular is very strong on this, that the body is really, it's a blessing that you've been born into a human body. It's such an opportunity, it's such a potential. And but if we think that we own it, or that we're entitled to it, or that it's ours, of course we can't feel gratitude, can we? We can't feel gratitude for something that we feel like we own by right. So as soon as we come into a more realistic relationship with the body and with all the elements, we can start to feel more gratitude for them. Sometimes when I do this full practice, this full 6-element practice, the feeling from it can be liberation, but also intense gratitude as well, like very, very strong gratitude for the elements actually. Yeah. Maybe one more person. Yeah.
I think that I just felt a sense of wonder, because even though I can't identify myself with my body or the space that I occupy, I still have a sense that I exist in some mysterious way. So I just felt a sort of wonder at that. Yeah,
that's right. And that also is very important, isn't it? Buddhism is saying is that it's that okay, that doesn't mean that you are a nothing. It's not actually when you let go of all of those things that what you experience is some sort of nihilistic void. Actually what you experience according to the Buddha and according to the Buddhist tradition is just the magic of wonder and consciousness completely unfolded. Yeah? What the Buddhist tradition says is that what we do with our consciousness is that we take something, our mind, is we take something completely vast in potential, and we squeeze it into this shape of us and our things, yeah, and we grab very, very tightly to that. So actually the experience of that for our mind is incredibly claustrophobic, because it's in potential, it's totally vast, infinite, it would say, and we take it in that infinicy and we stuff it into something extremely small. And of course, when we have moments where we sort of just let go of that identification, strong identification with us, our career, our belongings, our body, or whatever it might be, the feeling is always vastness, isn't it? And sort of openness and liberation and potential and all of those things. Yeah. So I think that's a good point. It's interesting, the Buddha often talked about when he became enlightened, what he said is, house builder, you are seen. House builder, you are seen. I have torn up your rafters and your foundations, and no more will you build this house. Yeah, no more will you build this house. So house builder, you are seen. So it's interesting, the whole sort of metaphor of building a house is very close to what we're actually doing with ourself. When we sort of build a self to try and secure us from these winds of life, the insecurity of life, we take refuge in a self. Yeah, we sort of feeling the insecurity of that, we go for refuge to a self, which of course can't give us security. We go for a refuge of self in terms of our views and opinions, which we think make the world knowable and secure to us and predictable to us. Of course they don't. We go for security and refuge in possessions, don't we? In people. We think that, we sort of get that perfect one, and they stay around forever and they are secure. Of course we know that that's not necessarily the case. We go for refuge to sense experiences, all of that sort of thing. Yeah, CVs, careers, the whole lot. So we start to build a refuge, or a false refuge from the insecurity of life with all the things that we do with self. And so the Buddha said, house builder, you are seen. Yeah, no more will you build a house. Buddhism says that we're always taking refuge. Yeah, we're always going in the face of that sort of insecurity. We're always going for something for refuge. But what it says is that the things that we go to don't provide it. Yeah, they don't give it to us. They're unstable and insecure themselves. And what we need to do too is go for refuge to the things that will be reliable, which for Buddhism is the Buddha, the Dharma, his teaching, the Buddha's teaching, and the Sangha, the spiritual community of those that have gained insight through his teaching. Yeah? So we're always going for refuge. We're always looking to take shelter from the vicissitudes and the precariousness of life through various things, but we look in the wrong place. And of course, many of you that will have come to the Buddha Center might have had the feeling that before you came that you were sold a bit of a lemon. I had that feeling. I was told that if I did all the adult things, yeah, got a degree, got a job, tried my best to get a girlfriend, rarely worked out that one, I'm afraid, but all the adult things, I would be sorted. It'd be grand. And what I very quickly realised was that I was sold a lemon. Yeah. It just didn't work, and that can often be the thing that gets people in first into the door of the London Buddhist Centre, is the things that we're often told should sort of resolve that existential angst for us, don't do it, basically. And so we come in, we look, ideally we look for somewhere where it can, where more where it can give us that sense of refuge. So I want to come back a little bit back to this area of security and house building, and this whole area of what it means to come back to home and home building. So what do we associate with home? What when we think home, what do people think? I mean, some of us have negative, but in the ideal of home, yeah, when we think of sort of coming home in that sort of way, what do we think? Yeah. Safety, yeah, that's right, yeah. Home is meant to be sort of safe, isn't it? Bad things won't happen at home, yeah.
So segregate from the rest of the world. Yeah,
sense of sort of security in the sense of defendedness, isn't it? It's sort of a sense of kind of like it's your own world separate from others, yeah.
Something that's permanent, that's always going to be there.
Yes, or you can always go back home, can't you? Yeah, that's right. And that's very much your experience of it as a child, isn't it? You can always, whatever happens during the day, you can always come back home, or ideally it's your experience of it as a child, yeah. Predictability, yeah. Stability, the sense that you know, ideally, things will be regimented and sort of predictable in a positive sense. Like you know the gig, don't you? That's what you do with what you try and do with children, isn't it? Basically, you give them a predictable sort of routine to do through the day, and kids really thrive on that, don't they? What they don't thrive on is chaos. So home, in that sense, should be predictable. Yeah. All of those terms are associated with home. And it's interesting that the Buddha referred to that. He referred to the householder and the householder life. One of the ways that he talked about it, I think, with those things in mind, as cramped and dusty. Yeah, cramped and dusty. And I think what he meant by that is slightly suffocating, numbing. Predictable in the worst sort of way, if you get me. Claustrophobic, yeah. All of those things. I think that's what he sort of meant by it. Basically domesticating, yeah. Basically domesticating. I have a little story along these lines. Years and years ago, well, not years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago or so, I couldn't go home to Ireland for Christmas. And because Boris cancelled Christmas, I can't remember, people remember that, Boris cancelled Christmas. I was so close, I was like nearly on my flight and Boris cancelled Christmas, I couldn't believe it. So next year I did get home, and I was desperately looking forward to it, because I'd missed the year before. I like Christmas, I don't know what it is. I like the consumerism of it, I like the cheesiness of it, I like the excess food, the fizzy pops, the whole lot. I like it. And I got back home, and my two brothers came back as well. So I grew up two younger brothers. I'm both close to both of them, and they brought their partners as well, who are really wonderful. I really like both of them. I'm very lucky to have both brothers I love very much, and sisters-in-laws that I'm very, very fond of. And we all came back, and it was them and me and my mum in the house for about 7 days. And it was the most domestic situation I have ever been in my life. At one point, we had an hour-long discussion on cocktails, yeah? And there was another hour-long discussion on cheeses. Not Jesus of Nazareth, but cheeses, as Edam and various Gouda and all that sort of thing. And I sat there and I thought, fellas, we are from rural Ireland. When did we become so bourgeois? Yeah, that was my feeling. When did we become so bourgeois? But that is the tendency of home. Yeah, home, by its very nature, it's in its positive aspect, is a nest. Yeah, it's predictable, it's comforting, it's secure. It's a nest, i.e., it's domesticating. Yeah, it sort of slowly injects you with sort of numbing serum. Before you sort of realise that you're in a very, very claustrophobic situation. I remember I used to go out for these 2 walks every day, yeah, and I'd open up the door. I go like an hour and a half each time. I'd open up the door each time, and I go, oh, thank heavens, oh my word, yeah. I'd get like down the road, I'd look completely crackers. I'd be going, oh my God, and it was just because the whole situation was so sort of domesticating. Now, what do people think might be the problem with domesticity in that sense, with the spiritual life, with leading a spiritual life?
I was wondering if it's kind of blissful in a way, and so therefore you don't look outside, or it stops you growing in a certain sense.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. It's fully contained in and of itself, isn't it? That's the idea of home and domesticity, that everything that you need is within that particular bubble. Yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else? Yeah. 2 seconds.
I just wanted to say, I don't want to challenge.
No, do, by all means.
But obviously there is the whole idea is that the rest of the world is very demanding and difficult. You do need a place of to feel more at home.
Yes.
And actually home is not only kind of a protective place, but it's also a place of love, and that's something that is very rare in a world that is very non-loving.
Yes, that's right.
So maybe it's a question of it's a spectrum, and a question of whether sometimes it becomes too much. Sometimes you do need to go out and explore the world. But also a lot of people don't have it, and it feels like it's important to value it.
I think that's right, yeah. So for a lot of people, a home situation that is predictable, comfortable, loving, all of those things, a bubble, a nest, is going to be a considerably better situation for them than the one that they're in. Loneliness is pretty epidemic in London, isn't it? And a lot of us don't even have that sort of home life where we feel that there's affection and love amongst the people that we live with. So you're absolutely right. You definitely want that in a situation like, say, for example, I'm blessed to live upstairs. It's a very, very loving context. I live with 9 other men. It's an extremely loving, affectionate context. I turned 39 last week, and one of the things that we do on birthdays is we just we give presents and we rejoice in merits. So we go around and people try to think up nice things to say about me. Yeah, so that's what they do. They usually do a fairly good job. But it's this lovely sort of environment. Now the problem, and I think what the Buddha is getting at with this householder life, is when that life becomes slightly neutering, if you get me. The Dharma is encouraging you to always go forth from that sense of predictability, of comfort. The Buddha's teaching, what I've noticed about since I've practiced the Buddha, and I've not been practicing that long, maybe 12, 13 years or something like that, but what I've noticed about it is it's always pushing you out into the world, getting you to look out into the world, and to engage with challenge, risk, all of those sorts of things. Now the problem with domestic situations is that they demand that you start to sort of behave in predictable patterns, which might be good or bad for you, but always predictable. So the capacity to change within them becomes hard. It becomes harder. The capacity to take risks within them becomes harder. And what I just notice with people in domestic situations is that very often they start to die slowly. Bit strong, but they slowly just lose all of their energy and sort of life. I'm sorry, folks, that's just what I see. I just see it going around Victoria Park, like there's people pushing wagons, and all of the energy, just life force, just sucked from them, basically. So that is one of the basis of domesticity. That can be a sort of tendency that is one of the dangers of them. And of course, what the Dharma is really encouraging you is to just keep on taking risks, to keep on sort of going forth from routine patterns and predictability in that certain sort of way. So it's a very, very demanding thing. The Dharma is sort of pushing you into the unknown. The Buddha's teaching is always pushing you into the unknown. And the unknown is threatening to a sort of nest situation, to a house situation, to a home situation. And home situations come in various ways. It could be one person in a flat. It doesn't have to be a family either. It could be one person in the flat. But the Buddhism what my experience of Buddhism has been is it's total adventure. Yeah, it's a complete adventure, and it's asking of you to engage in that adventure over and over and over again. It's never done. Yeah, what the Buddha says is that adventure is never done. Even actually, really, when you get to enlightenment is just to be said, be the furthest sort of perspective that you can see. Even at that point, the adventure goes on. Risk goes on. Yeah, that there's the constant demand still to sort of go forth from settling down in a certain sort of way, getting stayed in that particular way. Yeah. It's interesting. I remember a friend talking to me once. They were saying that they used to they were into this sort of financial guru at one time. They wanted to make a lot of money, and nothing wrong with that. And they wanted to make a lot of money, and they used to have this particular financial guru. Maybe your man Robbins or something. What's his name? Tony Robbins. That's it. Yeah. So one of these folks basically, and he was particularly struck. He was watching them. I think he might have even gone to one of the seminars or something like that. And he said something that really struck my friend. He said, you can either have security or you can have youth. And he said, when I gained security, I lost youth. Yeah? So when I gained security, when he got money, he lost youth. Because the tendency of security is to remove from you youth. Yeah? Youth thrives on sort of adventure and risk, and I don't mean youth in the sense of youngness of years. I mean youth at heart, because you meet a lot of old people, don't you, who are just youthful. They're full of youth. They're still taking risks. They're still trying new things. They're still going forth. Life is still an adventure for them. But very often, what they've had to do is refuse a life of security to do that. You know, they're artists or they're filmmakers or they're poets or they're authors or whatever that might be, and they've never got any level of particular security out of that. And so what they've done is they've kept youth. And it was very interesting that this guy said that when he gained security, he lost youth. So that seems to me to be the bargain. Buddhism is very, very concerned that youth, in that sense, that positive sense of adolescence, is kept throughout life. Now, what that doesn't mean is dressing 20 years of age when you're 40, yeah, or trying to be sort of cool with the kids or whatever it might be. It's a tragic look. Yeah, don't do it. Do not do it. Yeah, really, really bad look. But what it does mean is trying to keep that sense of positive adolescence, which is something like that there's more to this all than meets the eye. Yeah? And I think most of us have that sense when we're young, when we're teenagers. There's a sense of wonder and a sense of mystery and a sense of potential to the world. And then very rapidly what the world does is it gets in on top of you. Yeah? It sort of tells you, no, life and the world is this set of predictable procedures. Yeah? And that's what's said to be growing up. It's interesting, oftentimes when I hear people talking about maturity, what they usually mean is domesticity. And I think sometimes maturity is confused with that, basically. Maturity is confused with having the career, having the mortgage, having the kids, everything like that. Nothing wrong with those things, folks, by the way. It's just that they tend to, by nature, move you into losing youth. Some people do actually keep them. Some people can keep youth amidst those situations, but it's very hard, really, really hard. I would say almost impossible. So the Buddha's life is encouraging you to engage in that adventure over and over and over and over again. He's encouraging, the Buddha and the Buddhist tradition is encouraging you to not settle down. Yeah? Now that doesn't mean moving all around the world. That you get this sort of digital nomad thing. Yeah, I've lived in 45 countries in 10 years or something like that. Yeah, that's not what we're getting at, because that's often just a certain lostness And I think that goes to your point as well, that oftentimes people are just lost, and what they need is a rootedness, and they need home in that certain sense. I saw this T-shirt. It's a Tolkien from Lord of the Rings, quoting Gandalf. I think not all that wander are lost, and I remember seeing it, and I thought, well, but an awful lot that wander are lost. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So you can continue to sort of engage, go forth, shake off domesticity, shake off the stuffiness of household life, actually in one place. You needn't sort of move around to do that. Maitreya Bandhu and Yanavacha, very, very experienced teachers upstairs. They've lived pretty much around the LBC all their lives, 40 odd years, something like that. But they've constantly engaged and gone forth in risk over and over and over and over again. So it's not necessarily the external trappings of your life, although they are involved in that, they are important in that, but much more about an internal attitude, about what you think life is, and the willingness to keep on engaging in it in the full sense of its risk and potential. As soon as we stop doing that, we grow old, irrespective of what age we are. If we can continue doing that, we stay young, irrespective of what age we are. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to leave it at that. Okay, folks, so that's all we have time for this evening. So one way to forego a tiny little bit of security on your way out is to donate to the Dana Bowl. Some of you would have already have done that when you came in. Thank you very, very much. If you have, some of you will have monthly donations. Thank you very, very much. If you haven't and you'd like to, we appreciate all donations. So there'll be an opportunity, there'll be a Dana Bowl just in the reception on your way out, and hopefully see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.